Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to show you the pyrography techniques needed to create the Purple House Finch. The House Finch is the third of my backyard series, and I think this little guy is really striking and he was a lot of fun to create. So let's get burning. Set your burner to medium-low heat and use a writer pen tip to burn over the trace lines. Don't burn them very dark. The goal is to burn them just dark enough to see. Once you're done, rub an eraser over the area to remove any residual graphite marks. If you are adding a border like I am, use a knife tip, also known as a rounded heel or skew, to burn along the pencil lines. To help keep your line straight, lock your hand and wrist and move your arm as one solid unit. The arm moves at the shoulder level. Lightly burn in the line the first time. If a mistake is made, it's a lot easier to fix if the line is pale. Then reburn over the line to darken and deepen the burn. I hold the pen handle with a light grip and allow the pen tip to follow in the channel made during the initial burn. Use a white charcoal pencil and draw over the highlight in the eye. Switch to a shader pen tip and burn the eye to a dark brown or black color, but avoid burning on the charcoal. Keep the pen tip in optimal position when burning along the edges of the eye. Burn along the upper edge of the crest on the bird's head. Fill the crest with zigzag strokes. Zigzags are nothing more than lines burned in a back and forth or up and down motion. If you need more information about them or the terminology I use, please refer to my video about using the shader pen tip. I'll put a link to it in the description below. There is a pale streak on the face that starts by the eye. We are going to burn the feathers above this streak. Start by burning to the right of where the streak starts. Then finish burning in the crest on the top of the finch's head. Reburn as needed to build up the color. Work your way along the back of the head, burning in the feathers to the left of the pale streak. Again, I am using zigzag strokes to burn in the feathers in this area. There is a dark line running along the feathers under the face, so burn in that line. Next, burn in the short, fuzzy-looking feathers that extend a short distance below that line. Burn in the rest of the dark line that extends down to the chest on the bird. Burn in the feathers just under the beak. Begin by burning along the right edge of the area and then along the bottom edge. Next, fill in the lower portion of the neck with zigzags and long burn strokes that start at the bottom of the neck and get pulled up into the neck. Burn in the dark lines near the beak and then burn along the left edge of the beak. Fill in the area between the eye and the horizontal line that extends from the beak. Lightly burn around the different feather groupings near the eye to define their edges. Finish burning the feathers along the back of the neck. Burn along the edges of the dark feathers on the lower portion of the face. Use the razor edge of the pen tip to burn along the outer edges of the beak. Rotate the wood if needed and burn short pull-away strokes along the lower edge of both the upper and lower beak. Burn in the short wispy hairs under the beak. Reburn along the lower edge of the beak and extend the color. I am predominantly using circular motion as I am doing the reburn. Next, burn in the upper beak, keeping the color mostly in the tan range. Keep the reference photo nearby as you work. Burn a line under the eyelid and then burn in the dark triangular area between the eyelid and the beak. Then burn pull-away strokes on the pale feathers near the eye. Start the stroke at the base of the feathers and pull them up towards the outer edge of the feather group. Burn some short tan zigzag strokes on the neck. Burn in the dark ruffled feathers on the neck below the beak. Then burn the rest of the neck to a tan color. Lightly burn over the rest of the unburned areas on the beak. Reburn over the dark lines and areas on the throat. Then reburn the face as needed to build up the colors and texture. I like to work on the darker areas first. I compare my artwork with the reference photo and check to see if the contrast is good and the general placement of the lights and darks matches the photo. It doesn't have to be exact, just close. Make sure to keep the feathers on the pale streak several shades lighter than the nearby feathers. These dark feathers are short and have tonal variation, so burn really short zigzag bursts to darken them up. Leave little gaps here and there for tonal variation. I'm using more of the flat of the shader versus the razor edge of the shader for this. But keep in mind, I do use the razor edge of the shader here and there. On the neck, use the flat of the shader to darken up the overall color. Increase the length of your burn strokes in this area. Reburn over the pale areas on the beak and add the dark spot or dark area at the top of the beak near the crest feathers. Also, reburn over the lower eyelid. Now we are going to add some texture and a hint of subtle shadows to the neck. Do this by burning in short dashes and blotches on the throat. Keep them in the tan color range. At this point, it's really a matter of fine-tuning the face, adding texture if needed, increasing the darkness level, or adjusting the contrast. When I get to this point, I'm really comparing my artwork with the reference photo, and I start asking myself questions. Questions like, where is the darkest spot on the reference photo? Did I make that the darkest spot on my artwork? Where is the palest area on the reference photo? Again, did I keep that area in my artwork the palest area? I'm not checking to see if I got each feather perfectly in place. Instead, I'm checking the color and contrast levels of the majority of the stuff. Does the beak look like a different color than the feathers do? Is the front of the crest darker than the rest of the crest? Is the pale streak near the eye standing out? Is the shadow under the eye in place? If the answer is no to any of the questions, then I have to reburn to fix it. Lastly, I needed to darken up the top of the beak, not because it's darker in the reference photo, but instead because I wanted it to stand out against the unburned background. Looking at the reference photo for the chest, the left edge is darker than the right, and there is a slight shadow under the feathers along the lower left edge. Burn the chest and the feather below it to a light tan color. Burn some medium tan colored pull-away strokes just below the edge of the chest. Now we'll burn in the mantle. Start on the right side and use the razor edge of the shader to burn along the edge of one feather. Then use the flat of the shader to burn over the feather until it is a medium to dark tan color. Burn one feather at a time. The majority of the feathers in the mantle have a pale border along their edges. So burn the feather to a medium or dark tan color, but leave a thin line or band along the outer edge that is several shades paler than the rest of the feather. I am using a combination of circular motion and uniform strokes to build up the color on the feather, but feel free to use the burn method of your preference. Don't forget to rotate the board as needed when you work. For me, this position in the video allows me to keep the pin tip in optimal position, so the edges of the feathers are crisp and clean. The pale border along the edge of the feathers tends to be a tan color, so lightly burn over it to darken it up slightly. Just make sure to keep it light enough so that it is easily seen. Use the shader pin tip to dot or tap along the edge where the neck feathers end and the mantle begins. I am holding the pin tip in place for a fraction of a second to get a darker burn result. Then burn in the small triangular area near the left edge of the neck. Next, burn in the small section of tiny feathers below the throat. Resume working on the mantle, burning one feather at a time. I like to burn a line along the outer edge of the feather to define it. Then I often burn a line on the feather where the pale border begins. After that, I burn in the feather using circular motion and uniform strokes, but I avoid burning over the pale border. I reburn as needed to build up the color on the feather. The last step is to lightly burn over the pale border until it is a light tan color. Then repeat the steps on the next feather on the mantle. Continue this process until all of the mantle feathers have been burned in. Essentially, the mantle is done, but I like to do a final check and see if there's anything else that needs to be fine-tuned. I am adjusting the darkness level on several feathers and reburning along some of the borders to tone them down. During this process, I noticed that there was a dark band or streak that is running down the feathers that I missed, so I am burning that in. Now we'll work on the back. The back has the slightest suggestion of feathers, but they aren't clearly defined like the mantle feathers are. To replicate this, use the flat of the shader to burn in some feather shapes. Initially, I used a zigzag or up-down motion to create the feathers, but I eventually switched to circular motion, and that is what the majority of the back was burned in with. The most important thing is to keep the edges of the feathers indistinct or slightly blurry. Using the flat of the shader, will help ensure you don't have crisp lines around the feather edges. As I create a general feather shape, I burn it so the top of the feather is darker than the bottom. Also, I create a hint of a pale border around its edge. The main goal is to have tonal variation on the back with a hint of feather shapes in it. Located along the bottom of the back are several very defined feathers with pale borders along their edges. Burn these feathers in using the same methods that we did to create the feathers on the mantle. As you work on these feathers, be aware that they are darker than the feathers on the back. Reburn as needed to build up the color so they are a couple shades darker than the feathers above them. As you work on the back, make sure to keep the edges of the upper feathers vague. Don't give them clearly defined edges like the bottom feathers have. Also, check your contrast levels. The lower feathers on the back need to be several shades darker than the rest of the feathers on the back. Burn in the cast shadows on the back that are from the right wing. Then burn in the slight cast shadow along the right edge of the feather. Rotate the wood if needed, and burn the cast shadow under the left wing. Lastly, burn in the upper right cast shadow. Burn along the outer edge of the left wing. Keep your pen tip in optimal position when working along the edges. Burn in the bottom feather on the wing to a uniform dark brown color. The remaining feathers on the wing are dark and they have pale borders on them. Burn along the edges of a feather and then burn a line where the pale border begins. Afterwards, burn the rest of the feather to a dark brown color. This process is the same thing that we did with the mantle feathers. The only difference is that the feathers are a lot darker than the feathers on the mantle. I use a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the feathers, but I avoid burning over the pale border. After the feather is burned to the dark brown color, then the last thing I do is lightly burn over that pale border. There is a cast shadow on the lower wing feathers, so burn the shadow into a dark brown or black color. Burn along the outer edges of the large feather. Then burn the cast shadow under it along the right edge of the wing. Next, burn in the little bit of feather that is showing underneath the large one. Then burn in the feathers to the left of the large one on the wing. This particular feather is dark with a pale border. You don't see much more than the pale border on the rest of the feathers on this part of the wing. The border is yellow in color except along the lower edge or the tip of the feather. So burn dark lines between the feathers and then burn the rest of the feather to a tan color. Finish burning in the feathers on the left wing. The feathers are dark with pale borders, but the size of the border increases the further up the wing you go. Make sure your wing feathers are all similar in color. Now we will burn in the covert feathers on the right wing. The left side of each feather is darker than the right, and the border around the feathers are red, and the size of the border varies. Treat these just like the wing feathers. Burn in the dark area of the feather and then burn over the border. Since the border is darker than the pale border on the mantle feathers above it, make sure to reburn as needed to build up the color to the proper darkness level. The right wing feathers are dark with pale borders. Now the top feather is only dark on the left side of it, and the entire right side is pale. The next two feathers have increasingly darker right sides. After that, the feathers are normal, so they are dark with pale borders, just like how we encountered on the left wing. I am using the same type of burn strokes on these feathers that I did on the left wing. So I'm using uniform strokes and circular motion. Like before, I define the edges of the feather, burn a line where the pale border begins, and then I give the feather color. Lastly, I burn over the pale border on each feather. Rotating the board might make it easier to work on the feathers that only have a slight sliver of the dark area showing. Now it's time to fine-tune the wings. Some of the feathers on my left wing needed to be darkened, and I needed to add or create the rachis on one of the feathers. I did this by burning dark on either side of where the rachis was located. After that, I pretty much reburned over every feather to darken them up and make sure the edges of the feathers were clearly defined. The tail feathers are almost identical to the wing feathers. They are dark with pale borders, but they aren't as dark as the wing feathers are. Plus, the top two feathers have a visible rachis on them. Again, to create the rachis, burn a dark line on either side of it. This is the same process we use to define the edges of the pale borders. Just like the wing feathers, I am using a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the feathers. The upper half of the pale border is a yellow-orange color on the tail feathers, so burn it a shade or two darker than the lower portion of the pale border. Burn in the right tail feathers the same way that you did the left ones. Then, if needed, touch up any of the feathers on the tail. I had a couple that need to be darkened, so I'm reburning over them to increase their darkness level. Burn in the vertical streak on the edge of the belly using uniform strokes. Then, burn in the second streak on the belly using short pull-away strokes. Start the stroke on the right edge of the streak and pull it a short distance to the left. Then lightly burn over the area between the two streaks. Make sure to keep the color several shades lighter than the streaks. Rotate the board, if needed, and burn pull-away strokes along the edge of the belly. Start the stroke on the edge next to the tail and pull it in a gentle curve upward into the belly. I do not have a lot of metal of the pen tip in contact with the wood, so my burn strokes are fairly thin. Continue to burn and reburn over the area between the tail and the white streak in the middle of the belly to build up the color and the depth. The last thing we need to do is to darken up along the lower edge of the belly and to burn in the small cast shadow underneath the wing. Use a white charcoal pencil and color in the white spots on the branch. Then switch to a shader of your choice and burn along the edges of the branch. Afterwards, fill the branch with gradient color. The lower half of the branch should be dark brown to black in color. This dark color changes to a lighter brown at the top of the branch. I am using short, uniform strokes and zigzags to burn in the branch. The uniform strokes provide color, and the zigzags provide a little texture. It is easier to burn in a controlled and consistent manner if you pull the pen tip towards you, so rotate the board if needed to facilitate burning in this direction. Now add some short, dark, thin lines here and there to give the branch texture. The last thing to do is to erase the charcoal marks. Next, burn in the right side of the branch. Burn the branch under the bird to a dark brown or black color. Then fill the rest of the branch with gradient color using the same techniques that we used on the left side of the branch. But with this side, only burn a thin band of dark color along the bottom of the branch. Don't forget to erase the charcoal. Switch to a writer pen tip and burn around the edge of the dots to define them. Don't burn dark rings around the white dots. Lastly, burn some short, dark, thin lines here and there for texture on the branch. The only thing left to do is to burn in the dark frame or border around the edges of the wood. I will admit that the diagonal corner is a waste of time, as you don't notice it once the frame is done. I am using uniform strokes to burn in the frame. Make sure to keep your pen tip in optimal position when working along the inner edges of the frame. That's it for this tutorial. If you should try the artwork for yourself, don't be afraid to add a little color or experiment with the background. It is your artwork. Own it. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have a written version of this tutorial along with a free pattern and the reference photo for the bird. So feel free to check it out anytime. Well, thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.